آزادی بیان
言论自由
Free speech.
Tim Wu, you've seen freespeechdebate.com and the 10 draft principles. How do you react to them?
Terrific. I think someone needs to put this kind of thing together. It's not an easy thing to do, and I'm glad you've done it.
And we talked before about the difference between norms and laws.
Right.
Could you, you're a lawyer by training.
Yeah.
Could you talk a bit about the need for the difference between general norms and specific laws?
Yeah, it's a great point. From a jurisprudential perspective, the difference between a norm and a law is only that a law has a threat of force behind it. And what I think is interesting, in areas like this, the norms can be, in some ways, much more powerful than the laws. The laws depend on enforcement. They depend on cases being made. A free speech norm kind of reaches out to everyone and affects behavior on an ongoing basis. In some ways, what's interesting about norms is they're self-executing sometimes. If someone really believes in something, they do it, even whether or not it is enforced by an outside enforcer. If you have an internalized norm of free speech, people act on it. Also, you can have a situation of a decentralized enforcement with norms, which is to say that someone sees something happening, and this is what I think your website is quite closely linked to, is people see things happening, they don't like it, and they rise up against it. Now, it doesn't always have the power of calling in the police, but it can prove very effective on a day-to-day basis.
Can I just follow up on that? Because one of
Sure.
the things you highlight in your book, The Master Switch, is how the American tradition is very strong on controlling public power, weak on controlling private power, and private power is incredibly important online. It seems to me that this power, soft power of norms also applies to the Googles and Facebooks and Twitters, does it not?
I think absolutely. I think in the American tradition, since about the 20th century, when many governmental functions were moved to the private sphere, carriage, telecommunications, mass media, that suddenly private speech control became as important and probably more important than public speech control. This transition happened in the 20th century. Today, the rest of the world is starting to experience what has already been the experience in America, which is to say they have private decision makers having an enormous, almost disproportionate role in determining how free speech is. And when that's the way things are, norms, as you suggested, become all important. The way in which the major owners of the big switches or of the big intermediaries, the big guys in the information world, their attitudes towards free speech really make all the difference. It begins with them. It does not end with them, but it begins with them. And it can be even personal. What personally they feel they should be doing becomes very important. And in order for there to be a sense of a personal responsibility to protect free speech, there needs to be a community of norms that enforce those ideals. So yeah, I think your website is part of that movement, but I think it's been extremely important in the story of some of the big intermediaries today, whether it's Google, Twitter, Facebook, and so forth, that they feel this sort of social pressure to promote free speech.
So our second principle is we defend the freedom of the internet and all other forms of communication against illegitimate encroachments by both public and private powers. First of all, you're invited to vote on that. Would you vote yes?
Sure, of course.
Great. So click the yes box. Now, you said to me in an email, Tim, this is a very high principle, but it could be an even higher one.
Right. I'm trying to remember exactly what I thought when I said that, but what the highest level has to do with just human autonomy to begin with. That is to say, as tool-using creatures, put it that way, right, we are only as free as our tools let us be. Right. And to the degree to which they're controlled externally in ways we don't necessarily agree with is the degree to which our freedom is limited. Now, I don't believe in some kind of anarchy where you have total freedom at all times, but I do very much believe in what you might describe as a chosen life, which is another word for just saying human autonomy. And the freedom.
If I can just interrupt there, do you think that the expression of human autonomy through the technologies of the internet is actually being increasingly circumscribed, is actually being reduced compared to not just the cyber utopian expectations, hopes of 10, 15 years ago, but the reality?
I'd say it is in the sense that we are increasingly shuttled towards mostly in commercial ways. There's been actually two ways. First of all, more and more countries feel more confidence to sort of circumscribe the internet, and they're getting better at it. But I think what most of us experience are the interests of existing companies in protecting revenue models and steering us in ways that protect those revenue models. I wouldn't say it's too extreme yet, but I think it's something to be watched. Most of the pressure against free speech in the West is commercial type, and it's much less obvious than, say, throwing a protester in jail. It has more to do with trying to subtly push people in various directions, turn them into consumers, turn it into a happy place for commerce and advertising and things like that. And it's a much more subtle thing, but it also needs to be watched.
So could we, simplifying massively, say that if you're in China or Iran, the great threat to that possibility is the public power.
Yeah.
For us in more or less free countries, the greater threat is private powers and the profit motive.
I think that's exactly right. Yeah, because that's where the power over speech lies in these respective countries.
Tim, you are credited with coining the term net neutrality. Tell us in the simplest possible terms what net neutrality is.
Oh, it's a pretty simple idea, which is accounted, I think, for its relative degree of acceptance, which is to say that the big carriers of information on the internet should treat everything they carry roughly the same. It's just a non-discrimination principle.
And do you think...
And I'll say it's the same way... it's the same principle that says a hotel should make its rooms available to any guest with money. Same room, same rate. A taxi cab should carry you where you want to go and not take you to the gift store. That is the principle that, which common carriage is the original word, that informs net neutrality. If you get on the internet and you say, I want to go to place A, the carrier should take you to place A, not to place B, C, or the gift store.
Do you think it is now being significantly eroded?
I'd say it's a struggle. How's that? I think the last 10 years have had a number of successes and a number of failures, and it's more like an ongoing battle than a story of complete loss. In the United States, and I think in parts of Europe, the success, I think, would be on the norm side. That is to say, I think there is a reaction, and people have a way of expressing their reaction, which is really important, when there's discrimination against a website or slowing down websites.
Give us an example where you think...
I think that there's no way Netflix would have ever gotten started without net neutrality. I think it's also clear that Skype would not exist. We wouldn't be having this conversation without net neutrality, without there being a norm, and particularly on mobile. In fact, we know that it was the plan of the American mobile companies to cut Skype out once they moved to the iPhone and Android. That was the idea, that Skype should never be allowed to operate on these platforms. So there were reactions to those plans, normative and some legal. I think the Obama administration adopted the cause of net neutrality pretty early on by a speech by the candidate, Barack Obama. And so I count those as successes. It's hard for me to tell the story of woe and sadness when the President of the United States has personally dedicated himself to net neutrality. On the other hand, I do believe in all the countries where we see blocking and filtering, those are straightforward violations of net neutrality. And so there has been some losses as well. But it is more in the nature of an ongoing battle than in the nature of a complete wipeout or a complete victory.
Would you say that what's happened under the Obama administration is an example of public power in the form of the regulatory power constraining the illegitimate encroachment of a private power?
At its best. At its best.
Well, I mean, for example, what the FCC has done, would you?
At its best. You know, different parts of government act in different ways. But I would say, and of course, government is the same government that proposed the SOPA, the Stop Online Piracy Act. So it's been a mixed bag, but I would say that occasionally government can do what I think it was originally intended to, which is act in the will of the people to create norms of free speech for large intermediaries to follow. And the net neutrality rules are not perfect in the United States, but are an example of that. They're an older tradition, in fact, and I hearken back to the telephone, the telegraph, where the government intervenes and say, you know, you have to treat everyone equally. There's almost some analogy, particularly in America, to civil rights laws, where in the 20th century, the United States said, you have to hotels, you have to serve black people. We know you don't like them, but you have to serve them when they're here on business or any other purpose. So the government can sometimes act to fight invidious discrimination, and that's what I think it's done over the last 4 years ago, at times.
At times and at best.
Yeah. Yes, that's right.
As we know in American politics, money speaks very loudly, and so you have SOPA, the Stop Online Piracy Act, with Hollywood in particular, lobbying, producing, leading to or leading towards a bill which is clearly very overbroad in the way it's drawn, and then being driven back by Northern California, by Silicon Valley. So it's almost as if one great private power, those of Northern California, Silicon Valley, drive back the private powers of Southern California, of Hollywood, and government, Congress, is the theater in which that battle is played out.
I couldn't have said it better myself. It's exactly how laws are made in the United States through battles between private interests. And you have to hope that the private interests are balanced enough on each side so that somehow the people end up being the beneficiaries, but it doesn't always work that way.
And in the case of SOPA specifically?
In SOPA specifically, it so happened that an advantageous moment for Silicon Valley to assert itself and try and gain some political leverage over its rival happened to coincide with the public interest. But it was really a different conversation. But counting on that system to always work that way is dangerous. And the moment that Silicon Valley would agree on something that isn't in the public interest, then we're in trouble.
Do we have an example where Hollywood and Silicon Valley agree on something that isn't in the public interest?
Not yet. They disagree on so much that not quite yet. Although, you know, they could very easily agree on a modified version of SOPA that makes someone else pick up the bill. You know, Hollywood wants to take piracy down to zero. I mean, who wouldn't? Silicon Valley wants its cost to be zero, so they could sort of gang up on somebody else. In fact, they talk about the credit card companies who are fighting a number of other battles. And I'm not going to say the credit card companies can't fight for themselves, because they can. But that is kind of a good example of where another part they'll try and turn everything over to somebody else.
But it's a pretty perilous, as it were, guardian of global freedom of expression online if you have to rely on, so to speak, a balance of power between various private interests.
That is exactly what I think. I'll give you another example. Google is, in some ways, one of the companies that's done the most to protect the norms of online freedom. But relying on Google too much is extremely dangerous. For example, Google was a big backer of net neutrality until they decided to do a deal with Verizon for the Android system, and Android was suddenly more important to them. And then they continued to be a backer of net neutrality, except for when it came to wireless, basically. They sort of started to modify their positions. And that's the problem here, I think. It's very important to distinguish the principle of internet freedom and the principle of Silicon Valley should win all the battles it's involved in. Because sometimes they're the same thing, but sometimes they're not. Yeah. And I think increasingly there's going to be a great challenge as the larger internet companies mature, develop more stable monopolies, become interested in defending their market positions. Their interests, I think, are going to begin to change. And in fact, you can see that they already are changing. Twitter is a great example of this. You can see it in action. Twitter moving from a force of speech and rebellion, which they still sort of are, to taking on positions of greater responsibility, but really positions that allow its global expansion in a way that doesn't offend sovereign governments.
Can we talk about Twitter? Because that's such an interesting example at this very moment. Because on the one hand, it's clearly driven by the profit motive. It's a commercial interest to get into these markets. Right. On the other hand, in principle, should they not abide by the laws of at least legitimate states?
They should abide by the laws of legitimate states. But that policy, which is true in some instances, I think is being used over broadly. So there is, I believe very strongly with the principle that if you are doing business in a legitimately democratically elected state, you should follow their laws. Some people don't believe that, but I believe that. If the Germans have a sense that as a population they don't agree with certain types of speech, then I actually believe, and this is an exception to some more extreme free speech people than I, that will should be respected. But Twitter has taken that, which is, I think, correct, and exported it to sort of a general rule where they will take down individual tweets that sovereigns want them to take down, even if they aren't doing business in that country. And
even if they're not democratic.
Even if they're not democratic. And I don't know why. They're not under any real legal obligation to take down sites that, let's say Venezuela, assuming they don't do business with them, disagrees with. They're not within, and legally speaking, the jurisdiction of that state. And so, that country might not like it, but there are things that happen in the world that countries don't like, but they can't control. So I think Twitter has done something which is legitimate in some circumstances, but has taken it too far. It obviously prepares companies for expansion into other markets, which is always very tempting for a company in about the period that Twitter's in. But it definitely risks sacrificing its soul. And I mean this not only for the sort of spirit of the company, but even for, in some ways, the financial health of the company. If you go too far with these measures, you can lose something. Google saw this in China, and I can talk about that if you like. Google went to China and sacrificed a lot of its ideals to do so. They became physically present in China, and then they left, I think, 2 years later, having done nothing in the interim but sort of sacrifice whatever integrity they had in these areas. So I think it's a risky game for companies to play. And I mean this quite seriously, when a company's DNA, its origins are in free speech, when it begins to break from those principles, it does so at its peril.
So, how do we decide on the sliding scale between the fully legitimate democratic government and the totally illegitimate North Korea, at what point we stop respecting or half respect the laws of that country?
My main point is you should at least try.
Try to make the judgment.
In other words, I think a responsible speech-carrying company should try to at least accept that there is a decision being made. How's that? And they may come out different ways, but what I think is not a responsible attitude is just to say, well, countries are countries.
Yeah.
So you and I may disagree about, let's say, Thailand or countries. China is actually a challenging one, although I think pretty clearly a censorial regime that's not legitimately elected. You know, there's some disagreement at the borders, but the important point is that you even make a decision as opposed to just say, well, you know, country says something, we do it.
There are two principles. One is what I might call the Wu principle. The premise should be that laws made by democracies are, I quote, preemptively legitimate. Right? But I beg your pardon, are presumptively legitimate. Presumptively legitimate. There's a presumption of legitimacy. The other position is if there's a sovereign state, whatever its character, you respect its laws.
Right. And the second principle, sovereign state, you must respect its rule, actually is true if you are physically in that state. That's what gets complicated about it. If you physically decide to locate in that territory, I think you just have to obey the rules of that state. It's too much to ask Twitter to put its employees, its assets at risk. However, nothing says you have to go into those states.
Right. So
there's a decision prior.
Sorry, just to be clear. So the critique of Twitter is not that it takes off content which is illegal in a democracy like Germany.
No.
The critique is it seems to be prepared to do the same anywhere, anticipating going into those markets.
Correct. It's a blanket policy for an issue which is, to my mind, quite nuanced.
Right. Twitter in Egypt, if they'd had this policy, what would have happened during the Egyptian Revolution?
I mean, that's the question. It's possible that the Mubarak government might have said, we'd like to take down all the tweets with these hashtags. We're going to work with you carefully and go ahead and do it. And if they had done that, I can't see any, under their policy, I think they would have done that. I mean, their policy is pretty sketchy on their website, so they may say something different. And I think that would have been a pity. Particularly, I think it, in some ways, is a violation, not of any law, obviously, but of their ethics as an information carrier.
On that same point, Facebook and China, do you think Facebook should go into China?
No.
Because?
I think that, let me back up a bit and say something about these businesses. Now, there are a lot of companies in China. I think, for example, Volkswagen is in China and many other countries. But I think that information companies bear special duties. It's not unlike the media industries during the time of the Soviet Union. The New York Times made it the principle they wouldn't sell a censored version of the New York Times in Russia, Soviet Union, because it was against their principles. And I think that Silicon Valley sometimes likes to think that it doesn't actually bear any special responsibilities. They are just carrying other people's content. But they are the greatest media powers of our time, and I think they do bear special ethical duties in that respect. So I think the kind of censorship that Facebook would find itself doing in China would be unacceptable to anyone who believes in free speech. That they would certainly have to censor carefully what kind of groups could be made, what kind of conversations went on, and so forth. As a business matter, moreover, I strongly suspect that the impact of going into China for Facebook, and this is in their own private interest, would be that they would end up strengthening a Chinese competitor who would come to rule the Chinese market at their expense with their technologies. So if the track record of other companies is any sign, I don't think it would make good business sense, and I think it would lead them ethically tarred at the same time.
So it would be both bad and a bad move.
Yeah, I think so. Facebook is fundamentally founded on the right of association. You can join up with other people who you want to and be in a network with them. That's the thing that makes Facebook powerful. We call it social networking, but it's also known as the right to association. And in China, the right to association is limited in certain respects. So it would make Facebook into a police officer of social networking, and I don't think it wants to be there either for itself or for its own ethics or for what it would do to the company, the expenses for the company.